There's a big feud going on in the guitar community on YouTube. Old guitars versus new guitars, amp modelers versus amps. It's probably something that's never going to end as far as being a discussion. I think the reality is this, man. I don't think anybody should be looking down on anyone that uses a modeler or not using vintage guitars. And I don't think people that don't have vintage guitars should be looking down on the old guys. Look, man, people have very strong opinions about these topics. And I get it, man. I mean, on one hand, you've got the studio guys like Uncle Larry. And look, man, I've even heard Uncle Larry say on his own channel, his mother told him, be careful who you cut heads with. And I would not want to be challenging Uncle Larry to any kind of guitar playing exhibition. For people to dismiss a guy like that who has an extensive discography, who's played on hundreds and hundreds of albums, man, that's just that's just not wise, man. Look, I get people on my channel saying, "Who are you?" I just had one this morning. Who are you? And you've never done anything and all this. And look, but in the grand scheme of things, compared to a guy like Uncle Larry, I've done nothing. I've done nothing. But I've done a lot, man, because I've been in this business, for 40 years. And now I'm transitioning into YouTube. And, my fumblings and stumblings through my career and fumbling and stumbling into success occasionally, there's a lot of valuable lessons in that. Just as many lessons in a career like mine as somebody like Uncle Larry, just from a different angle. Perhaps you can learn more in life from failure, and I've certainly failed many, many times. But here's the thing, man. Do I think that a vintage guitar has mojo? Some of them may have mojo, but man, here's the thing. When you go and buy a guitar, you should really, in a best case scenario, you should be able to go in a store and try every guitar on the shelf. You try the vintage ones, try the new ones. If you're going to buy a guitar, and let's say budget isn't in question, you should try every guitar in the store. There's been videos with Rhett Shull and Tim Pierce, and they go down to Norman's Rare Guitars, and they try all the Les Pauls, and you can hear, man, there's a difference between certain ones. Certain ones have something to them, and some not as much. But the reality is this, man. People can afford only so much. There's only so many 59 bursts out there. Is every single one of them a great guitar? Probably not. There's probably quite a few of them out there with some issues. And can the average person afford a 59 or a 60 or a 58 Les Paul, or even a 57 or even a 1969 Les Paul? Can the average person afford that? Can the average player coming up afford that? No. Can I afford that? No, I absolutely cannot. Have I played these guitars before? Yes, I have. Have I used a 57 Les Paul on a session? Yes, I have. Back in the day in LA, you could rent one for $100. Back in those days, I don't remember what prices were, But man, there was a time when I was a kid where you could buy any Les Paul for $500. You know, the fact that the market has, taken off to the point where it is now, it does seem crazy. But, look, something is only worth what somebody is willing to pay for it. And if these guys with deep pockets or access to credit want to pay $650,000 for an electric guitar, go for it. What would I do if let's say tomorrow I got a phone call and I needed the most vintage sounding Les Paul I could possibly get my hand on. I had an opportunity to go play somewhere or do something, and I needed that, and money was no object. Would I spend $650 on a 59 Les Paul? No, I would not. Even if I was, let's say I had $5 million in the bank, I don't think spending $650 would be a good investment. But then again, people are saying those guitars will be worth $2 million in a few years. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. It's like I said, it comes down to, what somebody is willing to pay for it. And I think, look, if you're a player that's on his way up and you're creating music and writing music that's successful, and you're creating a legendary career by the fact of you playing that guitar, and I'll use the example of Greeny, the fact that you are using and playing that guitar, Peter Green, Gary Moore, and now Kirk Hammett, that's a guitar that has a provenance, or whatever the word is. Let me know in the comments. And it increased the value of the guitar. And you had to find a buyer like Kirk Hammett who had the deep pockets. And man, let's face it, there's not many rock stars on the level of Metallica who have that much money that they can just throw at a vintage guitar like that. And Greeny has a unique sound. It has look, man, Peter Green and Gary Moore, two of the all-time greats, right? I would almost feel like, if I was Kirk Hammett, I would almost feel like I'm not worthy. But you know what? He's got the money. He wants to pay for the mojo. He paid for the mojo. What would I do? I would go down to Guitar Center Platinum Room in Nashville, and they've got a whole wall full. I've done videos of it on my channel. Got a whole wall full of Gibson, Murphy Lab, and Custom Shop, and this and that. And I'd go in there and talk to my guy in there, and I'd say, I got the money. I want a Mac Daddy Les Paul. I want the Les Paul that you have here in the room. And I would try every single one they had. And I would go for something that felt good in my hands. So that's going to come down to the neck. I would try the different tones. I mean, look, a lot of those guitars are using the custom buckers, and those are great sounding pickups. Do they sound exactly like a 59? Look, I think you could get probably 90% of the way there with the current offering that they have coming out of the Nashville Custom Shop. I think you could get 90% there. Could I take one of my Les Pauls back here, my Les Paul Traditional, that's a Cherry Sunburst? Let's see, let me pull that out. Could I take this Les Paul, which, by the way, has an absolutely gorgeous top. Could I take this guitar, and this is a lowly Gibson Les Paul Traditional, which, people are fighting, these two guys on the internet are fighting over whether a traditional can sound like a 59. Could I take this, completely gut all the electronics, completely gut the pickups, and put in some original paths, or put in any number of the really elite, custom wound pickups that are out there. And could I get it to very close? Could I get it to 85%? Could I get it to 80%? Could I get it to 90%? I think that I could. I think that I could take this shell, and I think I could, if I really wanted to spend the money on it. But look, this is the stock pickup on here. I think this is a 57 Classic or something. And then I put a Bare Knuckles Abraxas in here. This is just what I used on the road. This is, you know, a guitar that I took to Canada and used on the road, opening up for Eric Church all across Canada in the middle of winter. I chose that I wanted to play Les Pauls on that part of the tour. And so this was one of the guitars that I used on that run. And, you know, it's a great guitar. It's got the 59 neck. You know, does it look like a 59? No, it's not worn. It's not aged. Even with me using it on the road, it's still not, you know, it's still not that beat up, considering that it sat in the trailer of of our tour bus, or whatever you call it. I can't even remember anymore, but it sat in the trailer between gigs. And when we would have a couple days off, it would be freezing up in that trailer. So there's no weathering, there's no checking, there's none of that. It's just, you know, it's just a really clean looking Les Paul. You know, and we'll touch upon the amp modelers and, you know, real amps. Would I use real amps all the time if it were convenient, if it were something that I could do? Yes. Would I have, you know, my stack? Look, I used to have a room filled with Marshall heads, filled with 412 cabs and Fender combos and all that stuff. And man, it just wasn't practical. It just wasn't practical to own all that. Here's the thing. Some of them sounded great. Some of them didn't. Some of them would always need work. Some of them worked most of the time. You know, and I am not a guy that did hundreds and hundreds of sessions. So when I did do sessions, I brought in a couple of heads out of my rack on the road, and I'd set them there, and I'd use an amp head, and if I heard the next song was going to be something else, I'd take the speaker jack and plug it into the other amp head. So it was very, very, low-fi. I didn't bring my whole amp head switcher in and all that, because that stuff was all on the bus, for going out on the road. Look, man, you know, how you get a guitar tone is really up to you. And the one thing that I don't like the vintage guys looking down on the guys with their regular guitars. I don't like the vintage guys looking down on guys that use modelers. I know a lot of guys that are pro guys that played in big name bands that are using modeling. Why? Because it's convenient. Why? Because it's consistent. Why? Because it can handle the rigors of the road. Could they use real amps? Sure, they could. In some cases, they're told not to use them. But man, I can remember a time in the 80s, just about any session you heard coming out of New York on an R&B song, like a Whitney Houston song. I can't think of maybe the title of the song now. Let me know in the comments, but they'd have a rock guitar solo. And it's obvious that the guitar player brought in a Rockman and plugged that into the board, and there's your lead guitar sound. That I would hear that all the time and go, that's a Rockman. That's that Rockman sound. People have been looking for solutions and ways to get around. Look, in New York, it's not practical to haul your gear down to the studio in a bustling city like that. You're more likely to get jacked trying to get your gear in there. Yes, they have cartage companies and stuff like that, but you know what, man? Not everybody can afford that. Not everybody has the luxury of that. And Nashville is one of the few places in the world now where they're still making records sort of the old way and using the tube amps and doing all that. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I don't want that to ever go away. But, for us guys now that are at home and recording stuff at home, it's a lot more practical. It's a lot more, I can get a lot better sounds out of a modeler than I can just miking up my 2 tube amps here. I cannot crank those amps in this house with neighbors 2 feet away to get a decent guitar tone and have the hum and all that, the noise and all that, man. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that for the stuff that I'm doing. In Nashville, they know they want that. They get that. They can dial it in. They can put a noise gate on it or whatever they do. There in Nashville. I don't know what they do in the control room. Look, I only did a handful of Nashville sessions. I'm not the expert on that, and I'm not gonna bash people that are. There is a absolute place for tube amps. We wouldn't have the tones that we have out of amp modeling if it weren't for tube amps. That is an extreme reality of it. Vintage guitars can have some mojo, but sometimes it's the player interacting with the guitar. Sometimes it's the combination of the player and the instrument, and maybe the instrument is speaking to you. These are all a lot of things that you can't easily define. The mojo in an electric guitar, in a vintage electric guitar, you can't really define that sometimes. You can maybe hear it, but sometimes it's only 5 or 10% or 15%, or even if it's 20%. Better, you can't always define what it is. Sometimes it's just more clarity in the old pickups that were wound less. The guitar pickups design and stuff has come a long way since then. And, Gibson has gotten better at emulating their past. And I think you can get incredibly close with a current guitar. I think you can mod a lowly traditional with some better pickups and get it closer. I think you can change the tone pots, and I think you can, if you really want to go down that rabbit hole of, the right plastics and the bone nut or whatever you think is the thing, I think you can do that. And I think the most important thing is, can't we all just get along?